So since I first moved into this studio space, I've kind of grown and become accustomed to the space that I'm in and learned really how to maximize on the real estate I have here and make the most of things in terms of how I have things set up for the best possible workflow. So originally I had a different studio desk that I built many years ago that came with me here to this studio, and it was too deep, so it came out into the room too much, and it just didn't work for this space well at all. When I originally built that desk, it was designed so that my studio monitors could sit further back, but the desk was too high, the very top of the desk, the rack shelves, and in here, with how tight the space is, it meant that my monitoring just wasn't right. So I got rid of that desk and I decided to build the desk you see behind me now. I'll probably do a separate shot of that so you can see it better. It's hard to get a decent camera angle in here with me in it because it's such a tight space. What I'd learned having the old desk in here and how to better make use of the space, I came up with a better design, built that desk. It's been great, but it is a little wider than the old desk. My monitoring is so much better with how I can have it set up with this desk. The idea basically is that the desk is two separate side racks with a small centerpiece for my keyboard and mouse and one of my computer screens, and then my monitors can sit behind that. I have this side table here that when I first moved into the studio, I had a similar thing in my old studio, but this was set up for my video stuff. So I have a separate MacBook that I use for video editing, and then I have an A10 Mini set up for all my cameras. There's a slide out shelf that I built for my MIDI keyboard. This area sort of houses all of that, making better use of the space here, and really it's not that comfortable doing stuff at this side table to do video editing. What I want to do is I want to, rather than being hunched over my MacBook screen, I want to move my MacBook and A10 Mini setup over to the main desk, which is going to be quite a bit of work just because of all the cabling and how I routed stuff originally. What you won't see is that there's a bunch of HDMI over Ethernet boxes velcroed to the underside of this video editing table. I've got loads of cabling. The idea is that I want to be able to use my MacBook, hook it up to my computer monitors, so I have to implement a HDMI switch and then also a KVM switch so I can use my main keyboard and mouse. So I can switch between, with my screen to my keyboard and mouse, between my PC for audio and my MacBook for video stuff. I think eventually the idea will be to move maybe to what we are now, M4, I think, M4 Mac Mini. They look great, the new ones. And having a much smaller footprint computer rather than the large desktop I've got under my desk would be nice. And just having everything on one computer, but I'm very stuck in the Windows ecosystem now for varying reasons I won't go into in this video. And you know, I like doing video stuff on Mac and I like doing audio stuff on Windows. That's just my personal preference. But anyway, so the idea is that I can have all that set up and switch between the two, have my A10 Mini set up at the desk as well, which would be great when I've got clients in the studio and we're recording, and I'm also recording some video because I just have it to hand rather than having to sort of wheel over to this side desk here. It's been quite impractical, this setup. If you see here, the TV screen is central in the room, but if you look at where my PC monitor is, that's wall mounted, it's not central. This desk actually needs to move along, and so I want to cut this side table down a bit so the desk can move along. And I want to make this slide out keyboard tray a bit better as well. One of my biggest problems at the moment is that I have this patch panel here, this unsightly thing that's underneath the side table. So it's built into the corner trap, and this basically has all my live room lines, so from the booth and the main live room, all these lines come to this patch panel here, and then they all go to all my outboard preamps that I have. Originally when I put this in, at first I was just going to have, you know, hole in the wall tails coming through straight to my preamps from the live room and the booth. But I had this patch panel spare, and I thought it'd be nice because if ever I need to like do any recabling and move stuff out of the way, I can just unplug everything, and then I've got a neat wall plate and no cabling there one thing that I learned was that actually this was quite useful because, say, in the case of my Warm Audio 500 series preamp, I like that on snare top, but I also like that on guitar mics, on guitar cabs, in the booth room. So I like to be able to patch different mic preamps between the rooms, essentially use this as a patch bay of sorts and repatch where my mic inputs are. But having it down there and doing that is highly impractical, especially when I've got clients in. So the idea is that I want to, either I'm going to build it into the top of this side table, which I think will be a challenge with having this keyboard underneath. Maybe I put it on the wall or something, but you can see there's acoustic panels here in the way. Eventually, this is a much bigger job, but I do want to like rejig, so maybe move my TRS patch bays over to this side. Originally, the idea was like mic preamps this side, which it mostly is, but then I do have some pre's over here as well, just because of rack space. But yeah, I want to make the cabling a bit better, but one of the problems I've had since putting this desk in and having this side table here, and then I've got my amp cabs here right next to it, it's actually really hard to pull the desk out. The desk is on wheels, and I designed it that way so that I could pull it out easily if I needed to do anything with cabling. But at the moment, that's pretty impossible because I can't actually pull the desk out very easily. If I cut this side table down and move the desk along, then I'll have a bit more clearance and I should actually be able to get behind the desk. And at that point, some point later on down the line, once I have this sorted, I'm going to recable everything, I think, in the desk and probably change how my outboard's racked and just try and make it a bit better. But I have some Clark Technic 1176s, the 76 KTs. I have two of those that are on back order at the moment. At that point, when those arrive, maybe I'll think about like redoing my cabling and re-racking things and improving that. But for now, this weekend's job is to sort the stuff out that I've talked about. So yeah, I won't film all of this. I'm not going to do like time-lapse stuff just because I think that's pretty boring. But I'll check back in when I have made a bit of progress. So I've just finished pulling out pretty much most of the cabling. Some of the stuff you see there just basically comes down from various places from the other rooms, down the wall or wherever. There's some DMX lines, some Cat5 and other things. And then I've got my XLR tails from the studio desk from my racks that are just sitting down there. Everything's free enough because I had a lot of stuff cable tied and velcroed to the back of this table. Now I can pull this table out. And yeah, we'll see where we go from there. I'll probably pull the table out and then move the desk along and sort of get an idea for how this is all going to work, maybe. So I've moved the desk. You can see like how far out with it being central it was with the wall-mounted monitor. Obviously, I'll have to move that wall-mounted monitor. I don't know why it didn't occur to me. Obviously, with moving my monitors, I'm going to have to redo my room correction, which is not a huge thing, but you know, it's another thing to do. I'm going to have to sort of recalibrate my monitors basically, and check the positioning, make sure we're all good. Luckily, my next session isn't sort of for a week from now. I do need to get on with some mixing work and stuff, but yeah, I did this knowing that I had some time, but kind of hoping that I could get it done mostly this weekend. So I've got these side panels, which are from an old Hammond organ, which actually some of the bits have ended up like on the doors and various places around the studio. It was a cheap Hammond organ that was beyond repair, and I actually turned the Leslie speaker cabinet into a rotary cabinet, which is pretty cool. The side table, I've cut it down. Obviously with particle board stuff like this, it's pretty, I mean, there's not a lot I can do about that, but I'm hoping when the side piece is on, that's going to mostly hide that. I did initially think I'd just kind of sink this into the top of the desk, but with clearance for when I put the keyboard tray back in, yeah, I'm going to have it kind of angled, I think. I'll have to build some sort of side piece or something, top piece along there for it to screw into. This way, it creates a barrier underneath of the cables because it's sitting on the tabletop still. I'll have to cut a hole for the multis to go through. Here you can't see it that well on camera, but yeah, the hole where this panel was, I'll have to like board that up or something. Yeah, maybe get some OSB sheet and just paint it black. Yeah, that's how we're looking at the moment. We're now on day 2 of this little project. Things have changed a lot. The plans changed a lot. I'm about to leave the studio for the day. I'm actually a bit headachy. It's been quite a long day. This is where we're at with what was the video station. I've improved this rollout keyboard tray a lot. It was a little, I don't think it was entirely level before, so it would often slide out on its own. It was just a bit janky. So yeah, it's a lot smoother now, so that's cool. This whole thing's just kind of a bit stronger, reinforced better, and I use these side pieces. I did think that I would put the patch panel into this desk, but I took the patch panel out of the wall and there really wasn't enough slack on the cables. There was just about enough, but it would have looked a bit untidy, and if ever I needed to move this desk, then it would have just been a pain. I wouldn't have really been able to do that. So I decided to do this, basically. I realised probably it was best to still have it mounted on the wall, but the only real point I could do that was on this bass trap, because this desk is going to slide along here, so this wall space isn't available. There's panels here. I ended up, actually a friend of mine popped by to drop back some equipment he had hired from me, and I sort of picked his brains, and I decided I was going to mount it higher on the wall, but here was possibly too high and there wasn't enough without disassembling this entire bass trap and like rebuilding a whole section of it, which would have been way too much work and yeah, just not worth it. The sort of supporting joists that go across in the bass trap, you know, top or bottom, there wasn't one near enough to bring it up from the floor, but up to here, there were joists that I could attach it to and like build out a frame, and I was going to have it flat in the wall. It would be better than it was, but it still would have been not great when you had a load of cables patched in like this and then you were trying to easily sort of see, because your vision would be blocked by the top row of cables with it being flat on the wall, if that makes sense. So my friend said, well, why don't you like angle it off the wall? I thought that was a pretty good idea, but it might be kind of quite difficult to achieve in a clean way, particularly with routing the cables through and behind. But I built this, and yeah, I think it's kind of worked out pretty well, or as good as it can do. So now I can really easily repatch any of my mic lines. I have my headphone lines on here as well and some returns, but I can repatch anything. I'm going to do some sort of routing of all these looms, and whether it's some hooks on the wall or something, so that I can sort of keep it tidy but have plenty of slack available. I did have to dismantle part of the bass trap, like take the fabric off and put in 2 supporting wooden beams like that either side for this to attach to, and then I thought maybe I could just route the cable back up through and punch a hole through the fabric and then yeah, feed the cables through. But that would have meant I would have had to desolder this entire panel, and that would have been a lot of work. What I've ended up doing, I think I'm going to sort of just stick to this, is yeah, I've got some little clips. You can't really see very well, but I've got some little clips the cables will sort of clip into, and then I'm going to put a sheet of OSB painted black to cover this hole, and then just put a little notch where the cables will come out the top. That's clean enough. Nobody's ever really going to be looking down there anyway. This table is going to be sort of up to about here. Rerouting the cables back through the panel behind this would be a bit cleaner for the amount of work, and for something that, you know, really day to day I'm just not going to notice, and I don't, you know, clients aren't going to notice, so it's fine. I'll paint all of this black, probably put a little varnish over the top, and then I've got to tidy up, and then yeah, just finishing this off, painting stuff black. my A10 Mini is going to stay on here, and then I can kind of hide all the HDMI over Ethernet, some of the HDMI cabling. I can hide that under here, so it will actually look a little cleaner than it did before. This table before just constantly ended up as a bit of a dumping ground, and it was forever messy. So yeah, this is going to be better. You can sort of hide cables underneath here, and then you've got like an upper tier shelf here. So you've got 2 levels. I think that will be quite nice. It's not the greatest thing. I mean, you've got this here. Like this, I kind of figured I would just repurpose this table, use materials that I had to kind of figure out what I want out of this whole particular setup. And then maybe later down the line, I can build something nicer or pay somebody even to build something nicer for me. You know, I think once this is finished, it will look fine. So that's it for today. I've got the day off tomorrow. The day after, I'm going to crack on with this project and hopefully get a lot of it finished in that day. We'll see. I'll update you probably when I've finished things, to be fair. A lot of this building stuff is not particularly interesting. There's a lot of me scratching my head and crying, and I'll show you guys what everything looks like once it's finished. Now I've got everything tidied up and tested and ready, and then hopefully this video won't be too long either. Check in with you guys in a few days probably. So we're now several days later. This definitely took a lot longer than expected. I've now finished all this work, which is great, and I'm pretty happy with how everything turned out. So yeah, I'll show you guys how things are looking now. So here we have the new patch panel, much more accessible now, so it's going to be a lot more flexible. Pretty happy with the way it looks as well. The plan for this setup changed over time. So you'll see there's a lot of unused space here at the moment. The idea eventually is that this will be populated with some of the synths that I eventually want to buy. I want to get some of the Yamaha Reface series stuff. The pull-out tray for the keyboard, which it's so much smoother now, and actually stays under there, doesn't come out of its own accord randomly whilst I'm sat in here doing mixing or whatever I'm doing, which used to happen quite often. It's like the ghost keyboard tray. This will sort of be my synth station eventually. But I've kept the A10 Mini here. I was going to move it over onto the main desk here, but there's too much on here already. I did think about maybe moving it onto here, but making that neat with all the HDMI cabling out the back would have been a bit tricky. And I thought maybe placing it there, either side, on the main desk. But then I was sort of worried about extra reflections from my monitors, which, you know, this desk isn't perfect in terms of reflections anyway, but yeah, it's pretty good. Got my hard drive dock, which I never really use these days, but that's there, plugged in if I do need it. But my A10 Mini, the nice thing about this shelf is that under here, I can sort of hide all the cabling, so it makes it a bit cleaner, which was a nice added bonus. So that's that, and that's what this looks like. I added on a little shelf actually with the bit I cut off this end of the desk. I have a little shelf here. I did have a different kind of shelf here, but I thought this looked kind of cool with the angle, considering that this was all just out of materials that I already had, and I wasn't building something from scratch. So yeah, just making do with what I had. It's not perfect, but yeah, it's fine. I need to tidy up some of the cabling here. I just need to buy some cable ties basically, but yeah, tidy up this cabling and I'll cable tie it to the back of the desk. I moved this lamp over to here, and that's nice because it's a bit more uniform with this light here. So yeah, it's better as well. I've moved the desk so it's more central. I'm probably going to redo my room EQ through Room EQ Wizard, although to be honest, sat here doing some editing work for some recordings today, it doesn't really sound any different, but I want to make sure obviously my monitoring's set up properly. But for now, for tracking on the weekend, it's sounding pretty much as it did. But you never know, you know, moving things even just the slightest amount can change how things are sounding, but it doesn't really seem to have changed it that much. And yeah, now it's more central. This was a lot more work than I thought it would be because of how this monitor's mounted. I had to take off this section of the fabric wall on the back here. So where all these bits of pallet wood are, the fabric sort of comes off in sections underneath, and that pallet wood framing hides the seams. You know, it's a little bit makeshift, but oh yeah, it looks fine. It looks kind of cool, I think. But yeah, I had to redo that fabric because there's a hole cut out where the cables come through, and then there's a wooden block that it's like a French cleat kind of thing that the monitor mounts onto, and I had to move that all across, which meant redoing the fabric because of where that cable hole came out. And then also I had to put another wooden support beam down the middle here. Well, I actually moved one it was kind of over here, and I've moved it here. You can see it's not completely central in line with the TV and this center speaker for my surround setup, but it's near enough. It's as central as I could get it with moving the desk as far along as I could get it. Weirdly, it's opened up the space a little bit more. This was sort of bunched up right against that before. And now I want to redo this amp rack because there's a bit more space here. This was on the cards anyway. At some point I'll do it because this was a little bit makeshift, just sort of using wood that I had. But eventually I want to buy some more bits of timber and build like a proper frame that will go right up to the windowsill. But that's a job for another time. I also put in this little shelf for my MacBook. My MacBook sits here on this little shelf in the rack. Sat underneath my MacBook is a dock. So everything that needs to be hooked up to the MacBook is hooked up to that dock. And then I just have the MacBook charger and a USB from the dock, which just hangs somewhere down here. I just have those two cables to plug in. I put my Mac on the shelf and it's ready to go. That dock is hooked up to a HDMI switch and a KVM switch. I can switch between my desktop computer and the MacBook for both keyboard and mouse and this screen on the wall here. That way I can be sat at this main desk. Before I had to be sat over here, hunched over my MacBook if I was doing any video editing. Now I can do everything all from this desk, which is much more practical, makes a lot more sense, and I can make use of a more ergonomic setup. So what the MacBook does in the studio is essentially it runs everything with the 8M. I use the 8M for recording video whilst I'm running sessions. It was a happy accident, really. The main thing I set up the cameras in here for was just so people could see each other. I could see people in the live room and the booth, and they could see me in the control room. I've got a little GoPro camera there, so people can see me. I have a screen in the live room and a screen in the booth. And so the 8M, I use the main preview out over HDMI hooked up to this TV. So when I'm running a session, I can view the multi-view from the 8M, so I can view all the cameras in the studio. I just want clients in the live room or the booth to just be able to see the control room camera, so they can just see me. I use the stream output over Ethernet from the 8M to get a second output. This is a little trick you can do with the 8Ms. The 8M streaming bridge box, which you might be able to see under there, which takes that stream out and converts it to HDMI, and then that HDMI from the streaming bridge goes to a USB capture card, which then runs into my MacBook, and then I run OBS and use the output from OBS to show that on the two screens in the live room and the booth. There's a slight lag, so a slight delay on it, which I think is pretty much exclusively caused by the streaming bridge. That definitely introduces lag. I think there might be some further lag through running it through the capture card and then into OBS. And so far, it's not been a huge issue, and I can't really think of a way around that. If I were to do the whole camera setup again, I would probably install just like some security cameras with like very low latency, and I'd use that for people being able to see each other between rooms. But the 8M is useful. This was kind of a happy accident. I had this in my old studio, we used it for live streaming, which is something I don't really do in here, but I use it when I'm filming videos myself. But also it means that what the cameras are capturing during a recording session, I can hit record and record all that video footage, and then I can use that later for content for both my, socials and for YouTube or whatever, but also to pass on to the artists that I'm recording in the studio. So they get, alongside the recording they're doing, they get some free extra content. So it's an extra selling point for me in the studio, so that's great. The other thing the MacBook handles in the studio is the lighting, or the handful of DMX lights that I have in the studio, which, to be honest, I don't really use a whole lot now. It was a nice idea when I moved in here, but they've ended up being a little bit pointless. They don't really add too much, because I find it's really just too dark, mostly with the main lights off, like in the live room or in the booth. But then with the main lights on, the DMX lights, they don't really add a whole lot. They're just kind of rectangular wash kind of lights. They can do like chases and other stuff. They have individual pixel effects. But that just looks a bit silly if you have all that craziness going on whilst you're recording. So I keep them on static washes. If I were to do it again, I'd probably set them up slightly differently, like position them in different places where they're rigged in the main live room. I don't know. It can add a little bit of extra ambience, but also having that over DMX control was a bit overkill. I don't really need it to be DMX controlled. I tend to stick them on the same colors all the time, so I could just have it set to manual to the same settings so that when I turn them on, it does those colors. But I suppose it's nice to have the option of DMX control, but the DMX runs into an ArtNet node, so the lights are all linked together over DMX cable, and then it runs into an ArtNet node, which then runs over Ethernet into my MacBook, and you have that set to a static IP address, and then that's picked up by CamSys, which is the lighting software that I'm using for the MacBook setup. I'll show you the one other thing that I've done in the booth, so we'll go over to there now. So before, here in the booth, I had the patch panel for all the mic inputs mounted underneath this desk here. At the time, when I first built this room, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I think my mindset was just that it would be out of the way and it would look clean in that respect, but actually it wasn't at all, because this chair just meant that, when I was running cables from that patch panel, it just became a giant mess, and then I had to move this chair out of the way every time and then crawl under the table, and it was a bit dumb. So I wanted to move where that was, so I've now moved it to here. So I need to finish painting this bit of wood that I put in there. It's not the greatest. I would have liked it if this was flush more, but I just couldn't. I don't know, if it didn't really seem to be a great way of doing that with running cabling out. Maybe I'll refine this in time, but for now I just needed to kind of get it done quickly. So I cut this bit of wood to cover the gap here, and then put in 2 cross sections of wood to screw this into, and then there's a board the other side just to stop cables getting snagged by amp cabs, or this cab specifically, or anything else. I might, if I move this out or whatever, I didn't want to snag any cables, so this has a backing to it on the other side. It's going to be loads better, so very happy with that. So that's that for this video. I hope you found it useful. I just wanted to document what I've been doing in the studio, show you guys how the longer I've been in here, the more you kind of refine the way you're doing things, and you work out the most optimal workflow. And I thought that might be useful to you guys in terms of your studios, whether it's a home studio, commercial studio, or more of a project studio like mine. I'm sure, if you do have your own studio space, you've also been through this process with, the longer you've been in your space, working out how best to have things set up, and I'm sure over time, you set things up a certain way to begin with, and then over time you've realized that actually it'd be better to have certain things set up differently, and you kind of tweak, you know, you shift furniture around, you tweak how you've got your gear set up and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, hopefully you found this useful and interesting. I just wanted to document this little journey that I've been on this week. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. That really helped me out. And yeah, I'll see you again in the next one.